It's been 136 years since the town of Johnstown was destroyed by a flood. The South Fork Dam failed after nearly a foot of rain fell in the region, leading to the deadliest flash flood in U.S. history. What followed was death, destruction, and carnage.
The town of Johnstown began in the late 18th century. It was platted in the year 1800 by Swiss immigrant Joseph Johns. Settlers were drawn by fertile land and access to the rivers. The settlement grew slowly at first. Its early economy revolved around agriculture and a port. Flatboats carried goods downriver, linking the isolated valley to larger communities. Pennsylvania started on a massive infrastructure project, the main line of public works, a combination of canals, railroads, and portage systems. Johnstown became an inland port. Goods were unloaded from canal boats, hauled over the Allegheny Mountains by rail, and reloaded on the other side. This brought jobs, and the population began to grow. By the mid-19th century, Johnstown turned into a booming industrial town. The Cambria Iron Works, later known as Cambria Steel, became one of the largest steel producers in the United States. By the mid-1800s, it was the leading producer of barbed wire. It employed 7,000 workers, and the company owned 40,000 acres of land. Homes, factories, and businesses were built close to the rivers. Steep hills rose up on either side of the river. In 1838, engineers constructed the South Fork Dam. The South Fork Dam was built between 1838 and 1853. Nearly 14 miles upstream. An earthen dam over 70 feet high and nearly 1,000 feet long. Behind it formed Lake Conemaugh, a large artificial reservoir. By the late 1850s, the canal system fell into disuse, replaced by the railroads. In 1881, the dam had new owners, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. A group of Pittsburgh entrepreneurs and businessmen. They purchased the dam and its land around it. They formed the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, turning Lake Conemaugh into a private retreat. Members included some of the richest men in America. When the dam leaked, it was repaired with mud and straw patches. The dam was lowered, reducing its height by making the water level just a few feet below its top. Fish screens were also installed at the spillway, which soon were clogged with debris. The earthen structure was never reinforced with stone or concrete. But life went on below in Johnstown. Floods were not uncommon in the valley. Smaller floods had occurred many times before. The lake held over 14 million tons of water. It was 2 miles long, 1 mile wide, and 60 feet deep. The water was held back by an old earthen dam. In the final days of May 1889, a strong low-pressure system moved east across the Midwest and into the Appalachian region. A system of slow-moving thunderstorms that resulted in continuous rainfall over several days. What was later described as the heaviest rainfall event that had ever been recorded in that part of the United States. Parts of Pennsylvania received 6 to 10 inches of rain in less than 24 hours. In some upland areas, totals may have been even higher. By the time the heaviest rain arrived, the ground could no longer absorb it. As it continued to fall, the Little Conemaugh River, Stony Creek River, and other branches began to rise. By the morning of May 31st, the rivers were already well above normal. The water threatened to overflow into the town. The lake had also risen steadily throughout the night of May 30th and into the morning of May 31st. By dawn, the water was alarmingly close to the top of the South Fork Dam. That morning, Elias Unger, president of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, noticed the water lapping at the top of the dam. Men were dispatched to clear obstructions and get the spillway working again, digging desperately with shovels and picks as rain continued to fall. Word was sent downstream, warning that the dam might fail. Unger ordered messages be sent to Johnstown, but word never reached authorities there. The men at the reservoir tried desperately to lower the water level, even digging a ditch at the other end of the dam, which was lower, to allow some water to escape. Others tried to support the dam with mud or rock. They worked feverishly for hours until they realized the dam was dangerously close to collapse. The men finished their efforts at around 1:30 p.m. By late morning on May 31st, Johnstown was effectively surrounded. Water surged through the streets, carrying lumber, wagons, fences, and pieces of buildings. Families fled to second floors and rooftops. Upstream, the lake continued to rise. At the dam, workers watched as the water began cutting into the earthen structure. The sound of rushing water grew louder. Between 2:50 and 2:55 p.m. on May 31st, the South Fork Dam failed. A small section gave way, and within seconds, the breach widened. Observers later described the dam simply melting away as billions of gallons of water rushed out. An estimated 14.55 million tons of water rushed downhill through the narrow valley. It carried everything in its path: trees, railroad cars, houses. It was a wall of destruction. Before reaching Johnstown, it obliterated towns and villages along the way. At South Fork, homes were lifted off their foundations and smashed to pieces. At Mineral Point, buildings were disintegrated. At East Conemaugh, railroad yards were annihilated. Locomotives weighing over 80 tons were thrown aside like toys. Some residents saw the wave approaching and managed to flee uphill, but many did not. In Johnstown, floodwaters were already high. People clung to rooftops, trees, and second-story windows. Some believed the worst had already passed. Then, in the distance, witnesses reported hearing a sound unlike anything they had ever known. A deep, thunderous roar. Those who looked upstream saw the flood approaching, black with debris, with trees, buildings moving impossibly fast. There was no escaping it. When the flood hit Johnstown, it struck with overwhelming force, at speeds of nearly 40 miles an hour and up to 60 feet tall. Entire neighborhoods vanished in seconds. Brick buildings collapsed, wooden houses were swept away, railroad bridges snapped like matchsticks. People were dragged into the current, battered by the debris and pulled beneath the surface. At the western edge of town stood a stone bridge used by the Pennsylvania Railroad. As the wave reached the bridge, debris began to pile up in its arches, forming a massive dam of wreckage. Water backed up rapidly, trapping hundreds of people in the rising flood behind the debris pile. Then, something even more horrifying happened. Among the wreckage were stoves, lamps, oil barrels, and railroad cars carrying fuel. At some point, a fire ignited. Flames spread across the debris field, fueled by the oil-soaked wreckage. Those trapped against the bridge barely stood a chance. Some burned, some drowned, Some were crushed as debris shifted and collapsed. Eyewitnesses later described screams echoing above the roar of the water and the crack of the flames. When the waters finally began to recede, Johnstown was unrecognizable. More than 1,600 homes had been destroyed, along with countless businesses. Entire streets were erased. The town was buried beneath mud, twisted metal, and splintered wood. Bodies lay everywhere, caught in the trees, pinned underneath debris, or buried in the muck. 2,209 people were killed in the disaster. Entire families were wiped out. 777 victims were never identified. Their remains remained too damaged to recognize. Survivors wandered the ruins in shock, searching for loved ones who would never be found. The Johnstown Flood became one of the first major American disasters to receive national media coverage. Newspapers across the country published graphic descriptions and photographs of the destruction. Donations poured in from across the country. Within days, trains loaded with food, clothing, medical supplies, and building materials arrived at the edge of the ruined valley. Among the first organized relief efforts were the American Red Cross, led by Clara Barton. She arrived in Johnstown on June 5th. Johnstown was the Red Cross's largest relief operation to date. Barton and her volunteers established hotels and hospitals. They distributed aid regardless of race, nationality, or status. One of the most difficult tasks was dealing with the sheer number of dead. Temporary morgues were established. Identification was attempted through clothing, jewelry, and personal effects. The psychological toll on survivors was immense. Despite the devastation, Johnstown did not die. Residents began clearing debris and rebuilding homes. The mills resumed operation and railroads were repaired. Nearly $3.8 million was collected for the Johnstown relief effort from within the U.S. and 18 foreign countries. The flood killed 2,208 people and caused an estimated $17 million in damages, almost $600 million today. I want to thank you all for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the next. Peace.